Hello, welcome to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine, where we're chatting to Hannah Beckerman, dubbed the new Queen of Domestic Noir. Hannah's back with her fifth novel, Three Mothers. We talk about how other work in the world of writing impacts her own writing, also how much she knows at the start, whether to plan or plot.
I think I'm sort of somewhere in the two, like lots will change. I do start with a pretty detailed writing plan in terms of the story arc and a 5-act structure and where it's going to go. But so much changes during the writing process. And I do have those moments when I think, you know, that character wouldn't do that, or wouldn't it be interesting if this character suddenly did this, or wouldn't it be interesting if this... So I deviate a lot, but I feel like I need that navigation just to get me going.
And we run through her work as a book critic and how much pressure that puts on her own stuff.
Why do you cry at some bits of books? And why do you get frustrated at other bits? And why do you think some bits are good and some bits are bad? And I think everybody is, anybody who is a reader is a book critic, whether or not they're writing about it in a newspaper or online or whatever. We're all book critics if we're readers. And I think, dialing up that critical ear when you're reading is really imperative if you want to write.
It's all on the way in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Now, this week's episode is sponsored by Faber Academy, whose flagship course is back. It's the Writing a Novel course that you can get onto in person if you're in the UK, and even further afield online. It's not just a course, it's a commitment to your craft. Faber Academy is a place where you can learn the essentials of novel writing like no other. Now, this podcast lets you hear from the best authors around, and this course can help you become one yourself. Faber Academy delivers a comprehensive programme over months that covers everything you need to bring your novel to life, going into detail on the character, story, structure, plotting, voice, dialogue, conflict, and everything else. So vital to getting your idea away. It goes really deep into what you need to know. Through the course, you'll hear from guest speakers, authors who have been there and done it, some of the biggest names in publishing, editors too. It's designed to help you hone your craft and direction. Now, Faber Academy have supported this podcast along the way. I've heard from authors who have gone on to do stuff with them, and they say how important and helpful it has been in helping them unpack the way they do it, this writing course. We've had so many authors on the show who cannot speak highly enough about the Faber Academy, and this is your chance to be one of them. Now, at the end of the course, part of your work is sent out to agents across the UK. You've got the chance to pitch your novel to some of the biggest ones around too. There are courses in Newcastle and London starting in October, and an online course too that you can take part in wherever you are. Now, you need to be quick to sign up. Deadlines start through September. Faber Academy is a place where you can learn the essentials of novel writing. It's not just a course, it's a commitment to your craft. And you can find out more. Use the link in the episode notes where you're listening and get to faberacademy.com/writing-a-novel. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. We find out where, when, and how they get the work done. This week, we are with Hannah Beckerman. Hannah works as a journalist, a broadcaster, a book critic for The Observer, The Guardian, BBC Radio 2 as well. She judges and presents at festivals and book panels, and has been dubbed the new Queen of Domestic Noir. That's what bestselling Alex Michaelides says anyway. Hannah has published The Dead Wife's Handbook, The Impossible Truths of Love, If Only I Could Tell You, The Forgetting, a bestseller, and is back with Three Mothers now. It's all about a tragic accident that kills a 17-year-old girl and then unites three women in very strange ways, while also it could tear their families apart. We talk about the novel, where it came from, and when she's writing genre fiction, how she makes characters unique across stories set in similar worlds. You can hear about what happens between finishing one and writing the other, what's she asking herself to move down the path of novel writing. Also, she's one of those authors that treats it like a regular job. So we run through that and why the word count changes every day. And we start, as we always do, with what Hannah sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
You know how on Instagram sometimes writers post photos of their room that they write in, and they're always in a kind of pale, kind of bluey grey on the walls, and there's an immaculate desk, and there might be a little bookshelf just with 3 very neatly stacked books and a potted plant, and it all looks very calm and serene. If you think of the diametrically opposed version of that, that is my writing space. So I've got a room right at the top of the house, and there's bookshelves all along one wall. One of those is dedicated to book proofs that are coming up, books that are coming up because I review as well as write. There are boxes of books pretty much all over the floor. There is a telescope because, of course, every writer needs a telescope in their study. No, it's my daughter's, and it's the best room in the house to do any kind of stargazing. There's like a lot of just kind of, I'm not a bricky-bracky ephemera kind of person, but somehow my study has become one of those places that just seems to collect this stuff. So partly because often my daughter gives me this stuff. So I've got pieces of coral and pieces of fossilized wood and various kind of stones and things and fossils that she's found in places. There are a few kind of mementos from travel. So we went to the Paris Olympics. So there is a little Eiffel Tower with the Paris Olympics on it, a hummingbird that I got in Costa Rica, and some various bits of slightly bad artwork that my daughter's done over the years.
I'm loving how much your kind of daughter takes up your space. Well, and it's interesting that you point to the glitzy world that we see on Instagram, whereas yours is much more real life. How happy are you with kind of the clutter and the chaos all around you?
So I am generally quite disorganized anyway, but I'm also a fully subscribed member to the Maggie O'Farrell School of Writing, which is tidying, washing, like life admin, all of that can wait. Unfortunately for me, it kind of waits forever and I never quite get round to it. I don't think I could ever keep a space continually tidy, and I don't want the stress and the effort of trying. So I kind of just embrace. I own my chaos in my study. I think I don't really see it anymore. I think my husband probably comes in here and has a slight shudder down his spine. I sort of don't really see it. All I see is kind of my writing life. So books, notebooks, pens, many pieces of paper. I have a cork board where I do the post-it note thing when I'm plotting out a book. I think I sort of don't really see it. It's almost just like a really comfortable blanket around me that is just familiar and well known.
Now, we'll come to the particulars of the day in a little bit, but you mentioned the corkboard with kind of post-it notes around it, and I know that your working life is surrounded by books because you work as a book critic, or you've done a lot of that side of things. How much, I guess, planning, faff and accoutrement needs to be around you to keep you in check of what it is that you need to do when you're working across quite a few different platforms?
I'm not sure sort of planning faff in terms of kind of just organisation in general, because despite the kind of chaos of my writing room, I'm actually pretty organised at, keeping to-do lists. And when I have copy to file for a newspaper, I will always be the person who's filing 2 weeks early. So I'm kind of a bit of a swot in that way. So I don't sort of need a lot of stuff to help me get organised. I'm quite good at just kind of doing the stuff that needs to be done when it needs to be done. So I feel like there's probably a bit of a contradiction there in the sense that I'm quite messy, but also often my head is quite well organised.
Take me down to the desk. So aside from I really enjoyed, by the way, you were like, yeah, I don't really have bric-a-brac, but I've got fossilized wood on my desk. Yeah.
There was a couple of years where fossiling was the craze, and I think I have been at least once, if not 2 or 3 times, to every fossil location in the UK and have brought home stuff from every single place in the UK. So there's evidence of that pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
What else is on the desk that pertains more to your work? So do we have notebooks?
Run
us through that.
I always have 2 notebooks on the go, because I have, I never get through a whole notebook on a book, and I can't bear to waste the rest of it. If I've only used like a third of a notebook, I'm not going to waste the rest of it. So I've always got one that is the most recent book, and then will be the book after next, and then the one which is the book that I'm writing at the moment, and then will be 2 after next, if that makes sense. So I've always, because, as you know from talking to lots of writers, at the moment I'm obviously still in the process of promoting my new book, and there are notes to do about various PR things that I'm doing, whilst I'm plotting and writing the next one, so that you're always, and actually plotting the one after that as well, so that you're always spinning kind of multiple narratives at the same time. So I have 2 notebooks. I have a sheaf of paper, which is things like, I always have a writing plan for what I'm writing at any one time. I have at the moment, I have a themes document, which is the themes that I'm thinking about and cogitating on for my next book. I have a fountain pen and various other pens and pencils and a rubber and a couple of wooden boxes, one of which was my grandfather's, and one of which I got in Morocco many years ago, that smells divine. I can't remember what wood it is, but if you open it up and you smell it, you just get the whole sense of being in a souk in Morocco. So I always like that being there. Always have a water bottle. I drink an insane amount of water every day. And naughtily, I also have my phone, which shouldn't be on my desk.
What's on the screen? We get quite technical, so just run us through what software you use, if you've got any strong font opinions. Okay,
so you're probably talking to the wrong person if you want technical info, because I'm not very technical. So the font I'm on a MacBook Air, and I write in Word, and I always write in Cambria, which is a little bit like Times New Roman, but not quite as fusty. And I've written in that for years and years. And if someone said you have to now go and write in a new font, I would be quite freaked out and probably wouldn't be able to do it. I always have a million tabs open on my computer screen, which again, I suspect is a sign of my kind of general chaos. But at the moment, I think I have 7 documents open that pertain to the novel that I'm writing now. Everything from notes to character profiles, cast lists, timelines, writing plans. They are all there, and I just toggle between them all day long.
Just touching on that then, all of these notes around you, because having spoken to so many different writers, some of them will be so loosely flying by the seat of their pants. They make no notes at all. There's no cast list. There's nothing that helps them keep track of really what's happening. The way that you do it, how naturally does that come to you, and how much is just you working in, publishing your 5th book now and working in the sphere of writing that you know that might be a sensible way to approach it?
Yeah, no, I've always done it like this. It's not that I've been on some kind of, learning journey and figured this out that works for me. I think, like you, I've talked to a lot of writers over the years, and I'm always really envious of people who can just sort of dive in without knowing where they're going. I remember, Patrick Gale always talks about how he thinks for a year about writing a book, and then he sits down to write it. And to quote his words, it's like dictation. I've never had a book that's come to me like dictation before. And I know, some people I can't remember who I was listening to the other day, he said they always start with the final chapter. It was William Boyd on Desert Island Discs, talking about he always starts with the final chapter, because then he can't ever say that he's got writer's block, because he knows where he's going. I'm really methodical. I like to start at the beginning and work my way through methodically. But I think every writer has a way that works for them, and I know there are various degrees of kind of preparation from just thinking and then sitting down and writing and seeing where it takes you and being really surprised, having no idea where your characters are going to go and what the story is going to be, to like an even more extreme version of my plotting, which is every single scene plotted out and mapped out, and having such a clear roadmap. I think that's why lots of people can write books in kind of 6 to 9 months, because I think if you've got that really clear roadmap, then often that is feasible. I think I'm sort of somewhere in the two, like lots will change. I do start with a pretty detailed writing plan in terms of the story arc and a 5-act structure and where it's going to go. But so much changes during the writing process. And I do have those moments when I think, like that character wouldn't do that, or wouldn't it be interesting if this character suddenly did this, or wouldn't it be interesting if this. So I deviate a lot, but I feel like I need that navigation just to get me going.
You mentioned a moment ago about having a few different projects in your head at the same time, because like right now you are doing publicity for the new novel, and you're probably planning or started writing a next novel. So you've got a lot working in your head at a moment. Is there a time when you make a conscious decision that you're not going to think about what you've done before? And you're it's like, okay, I've done all the publicity for Three Mothers or whatever it is, and now I'm only going forward. Like, is there ever a moment, and how does that feel?
I don't think for me, there's not a conscious moment. I think it sort of just ebbs away naturally for me. So there's a point at which, as you say, like at the moment, I'm sort of beginning to write the next book, and I'm also thinking about the book after. And there was actually a moment before I did the first publicity for Three Mothers where I had to slightly refresh my memory, because obviously I finished it like a year ago, and haven't looked at it at all since probably last August. And there was a moment of kind of refreshing, and now I'm very much kind of back into that world. But I think for me, it's just a kind of natural ebbing away. There will be a point at which I'm not needing to think about it anymore. I mean, to the point that if you now ask me about the book prior to Three Mothers, I'd have to really think quite hard about it, because it feels like it's quite a long time ago. And I have a terrible memory for books. I mean, as for someone who is a book critic, I have a terrible memory for books. And if I don't keep lists of what I've read and what I thought about them, then I wouldn't remember, what I thought about a book I read last week.
It's interesting that you raise that kind of thing of moving on, because when you write your first novel, it's such like a labour of love, and you've never done it before. You have no real idea of what's going to come next. Who knows if it will be successful or not? And then, it might do quite well, and then you publish another one and another one and another one. But then normally what could happen is success comes like a little further down the line, which is, I know that can happen to quite a few people. When that happens to you, and maybe your third and fourth book get much bigger than the ones that have come before, how does that change your view in writing for the future, and slightly warp your view of what success is, which you wouldn't have had that viewpoint when you first start off?
I mean, I think there's that. When you write your first novel, there is that complete freedom and liberty that you don't have any writers or publishers or the readers or any expectations on your shoulder at all. It's the only kind of free writing in that way that I think an author ever does, because as you say, you have no idea whether it's ever going to see the light of day. I mean, I think for me, it's become I've sort of just become more attuned to what works in terms of plot and what works in terms of character. I mean, it's about learning your craft. And, between my debut novel, which wasn't hugely successful, and actually, it's the least favourite of all my books by quite some distance. Between that and my second novel getting published, I wrote 2 full novels that didn't get picked up. And at the time, that was incredibly hard. I was doing it with a very, very young child. I was often writing at kind of 3 o'clock in the morning before the day began. And and I was just, it was, now I think it was a fantastically useful thing to have happened, because I think A, it made me much more resilient, B, it made me much more grateful for being published when I then got published again. But also it meant I got my 10,000 hours in. I spent a lot of time working out what wasn't working. And I think it meant that by the time I actually came to my second novel, I was a significantly better writer than I had been for my debut.
Does that stay with you, knowing that hardship, how tricky it was, and also the fact that your debut is your least favourite? When you now arrive at trickier writing times, how fresh is that in your memory that you know that you can persevere?
Yeah, no, I think it was really important in terms of, as I say, that kind of emotional resilience. And I think the point at which, I started writing my debut novel in 2012. So, it's 13 years of writing. You do start to trust the process a bit more. And I know now that when there are days when I just can't get my head into it, or I know that everything I've written is rubbish and will end up in the bin, I sort of I don't panic at this. I don't panic anymore. I can feel kind of really down about it and a bit kind of anxious. But I think I trust that probably it's going to come good again. So I've always been a lark rather than an owl. So it's rare that I'm not naturally awake before 6 anyway. And I generally do kind of like family mothering stuff until my daughter leaves at about 7:30. I then either go for a walk or a run first thing in the morning, which I find both clears my head, but also I think it does give you something physical that helps you through the rest of the day. So I generally start writing between sort of 8:30 and 9:00. And then I treat it really very much as a job. I sit at my desk until 3 or 4, and I just work. And some days are wonderful, and everything just pours out of you, and you've written 4,000 words before you know it. And other days, every single day is like work, like sort of pulling teeth, and you just have to sort of muddle your way through those tougher days and celebrate those better days. I mean, it's really interesting. I find that if I have a really brilliant, productive, high word count day, inevitably the next day will not be as good. It's almost like we're not going to give you 2 of those in a row. So I'm very aware of the kind of peaks and troughs of that creative process. That I know there are some writers who will write 3,000 words every single day. For me, I just sort of I'm trying very hard to be as productive as I can, but I'm also aware that it will ebb and flow, and that some days will be more productive than others. Not just I don't like obsessing about word counts. I don't really think it's about the word count. I think it's about the quality of the words that you're writing. I'd rather write 1,000 words that I think are good and that have a chance of staying in the book than 3,000 words that are just sort of there to tick up the numbers.
Has your antenna for what's a good word changed with experience?
I think I think I've always really cared about nice sentences, like a stylistically nice sentence. There are lots of writers who I admire enormously, who I will never write anything nearly as good as, but I so value a nice sentence in a novel when I'm reading one, or lots of nice sentences in novels. So I've always worked quite hard on trying to craft nice sentences, and sometimes the things that will stall me on a first or second draft is that I can get quite sidetracked for quite a long time about trying to find a perfect metaphor or a perfect simile or a perfect description. And I'm trying to get better at just ploughing on through that and thinking you can sort that out later. Let's just get the story down for now. Let's just, let's just at least get someone, because I know, I'm a serial redrafter, so I know I will come back to it many, many times. But for me, there are some books which are brilliantly plotted, and you kind of race through them and they're incredibly propulsive, but there's not necessarily any point at which you think, oh, that's a really lovely image, or that's a really lovely sentence, or I really love the way they've put that idea together. And for me, that's quite an important part of both writing and reading.
Well, there are many ways to skin the cat, but you've spoken to so many authors like me, and they'll always say that, well, writing is in the rewriting. So if you're really aiming to get perfect sentences, hopefully perfect sentences down first time, when you come back to the edit, what type of things do you find yourself normally having to move and shake around?
Well, as I say, I'm a serial redrafter. I mean, I don't think any book of mine since book 2 has been less than about 20 drafts. So I just draft and redraft and redraft. And sometimes that is purely a stylistic draft. And I will read it aloud, and any sentence that the cadence doesn't quite work, or I stumble over slightly, I will then work on. So there's at least 2 or 3 read aloud, purely stylistic read-throughs. In fact, usually more than that. In the early days, it's often more about whole chunks of like narrative that don't work. And obviously, as soon as I send it to my editor, I have 2 editors. I have one at my publishers, and then we have a freelance editor who works alongside her. And as soon as they have read it, then obviously lots of things will get thrown up in the air again about their first responses. So then things can get moved around. So I sort of I tend to oscillate between throughout the process between kind of structural edits and sort of stylistic edits. So, but even before I send it for the very first time to my editors, I would have probably done 3 or 4 drafts plus a stylistic draft, so that, because I want them to have at that point as smooth a read as possible, so that bad writing doesn't get in the way of them being able to sort of just think about the story as a whole.
You mention not being focused on a word count and kind of sitting there for 6 or 7 hours, whatever it is, and just getting through what you can. How do you know it's a good day? What are you happy with?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Because I think honestly it changes. I think there are some days where I do care about the word count and I just want to get some words down. And there are other days where I'm sort of lost in a scene and I just really want to kind of immerse myself in a particular scene and get that right. So I don't think it's the same for me every day. I think it partly depends on my mood. It partly depends where I am in the book. It partly depends on how difficult the book is being. So I think that kind of changes.
And as a journalist and book critic and event host too, other things will pop up. How do you go about dealing with that and wriggling time in your diary to fit in other words that you maybe need to get down for a newspaper or something?
Yeah. I think I have become, I'm doing sort of less of that stuff now, because I think I was finding the juggle actually quite hard. If you are midway through writing a first draft and then you've got a week where you're going off to, I don't know, chair at a festival or something, I find that interruption quite difficult. I mean, I even find the interruption of overnight quite difficult. The first half an hour a day, it's always slightly kind of like wading through treacle, just trying to get back into where I was the day before, ditto weekends. So, pre-COVID, I did an awful lot of chairing and I was away from my desk and often for like days at a time, quite a lot. And I think that does interrupt the flow in a way that's not productive. I mean, I'm always, again, slightly agog when I read people saying, I wrote this novel in my lunch break in a car park from work, or I wrote this, snatching 10 minutes while my baby was sleeping every day for like a year. Because I can't sort of pick up the baton that quickly and run with it. I need a bit of a jog before I can start sprinting with it again.
So if you know that you hate when the flow is interrupted and it's slower work to get back to it, what have you learned just makes it like a little bit easier, makes that treacle a little bit thinner when you come to start every day?
So for me, it's about making sure I reach a proper end point, which is often I might finish half an hour early than I need to because I've finished a chapter and know where I'm starting tomorrow, like the next day, than come to a chapter halfway through and have to pick myself up again and find my way into it. I get weirdly kind of superstitious about writing, about if I'm halfway through a chapter and I'm really into it and I have to stop, I have this sense that I'll never now write that chapter as I was going to write it yesterday, which is, of course, is absolutely true. I will never write it as I would have done yesterday. And I have this real anxiety about, like, well, probably the one that I would have done yesterday will be really, like, much better than the one I will do tomorrow. So I always try to end at a point which feels like a natural ending point, which generally is the end of a chapter. Because I've obviously got a writing plan. I know where I'm going the next day.
In the middle of your day, if you are trying to work right through, how do you find your energy ebbing and flowing throughout 6 or so hours?
So I'm much better the first few hours in the morning. I then tend to have a lull, like an energy lull, I guess around lunchtime. What's really interesting is I've never been able to work in the evenings before, and actually in the last kind of 6 months or so, I've been finding I do the school run in the afternoon, and I've been finding I've been coming home at kind of 5 o'clock and often having a second wind for 2 or 3 hours, which is like just in like sort of the natural rhythm of my kind of day. Has never been the way. I've never wanted to do that. So that's actually been quite nice because it feels like a sort of bonus session where I get to do another 2 or 3 hours and actually feel quite energized and engaged in it.
Back with more from Hannah in just a sec. This week, the podcast is sponsored by Faber Academy, whose flagship writing a novel course is back. And it's not just a course, it's a commitment to your craft. Find out more about getting enrolled. Use the link in the episode notes wherever you're listening. And remember, you can support the show. You can even sponsor it too. If you've published a book, maybe self-published something, and it really deserves more talking about than it has had so far, well, let me plug it for you. Let me give it a big push on the show. You can do that by backing us over on our Patreon page. There's a backing tier over there that lets your book sponsor this podcast for as long as you'd like. Also, you get merged. There is bonus content there too, and it gets you access to a writing community. And it's just a rolling pledge to support the show. It helps me keep bringing you these chats with the biggest authors around as often as I can. That's over on our Patreon page. I appreciate, though, that supporting this podcast monthly isn't always the best way for you to do it. Well, that's fine. You can do it as a one-off if you would still like to help us out. You can do that on our Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com/writers routine. You can send over whatever you fancy, one and done. It comes to me and it helps me keep bringing you these podcasts. So a few ways for you to support us there on Ko-Fi and Patreon. You can find links for both in the episode notes wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it then with Hannah Beckerman chatting about her new novel as the new Queen of Domestic Noir. It's called The Three Mothers. You can hear all about the book. Also, when she's writing genre fiction, how she makes characters unique across stories. And we get back to it, talking about her work as a book critic and an interviewer and a judge of festivals. Does all that work stand her in good stead for being a novelist? Is there pressure?
I feel it enormously, actually. I mean, I know the cliche about you can't be a writer until you're a reader. I think it's absolutely true, and it's a cliche for a reason. So I think reading other people's prose is the best way to understand, what works and what doesn't, and understand story structure and character. I think for me, talking to other writers and interviewing other writers is just an enormous privilege. I mean, I've always felt like doing events with writers is almost like just getting a masterclass, but getting paid for it. Because, writers generally are pretty insightful and quite generous with the way they talk about their writing, in terms of, generosity in terms of being very open and candid about it. And I would say that it's been enormously instructive, actually, in talking to other authors about the way that they work. It's funny. I think about how many times that festivals and events, people ask, I want to be a writer, what do I need to do? And someone will say, what was the last book you read? And often they're not huge readers. And for me, that is absolutely the first port of call. Is be a reader. Figure out what you like reading, what you like, the stories that move you. Why do you cry at some bits of books? And why do you get frustrated at other bits? And why do you think some bits are good and some bits are bad? And I think everybody is, anybody who is a reader is a book critic, whether or not they're writing about it in a newspaper or online or whatever. We're all book critics if we're readers. And I think, dialing up that critical ear when you're reading is really imperative if you want to write.
Well, the nature of that side of things, so just by chatting to you, it comes across that you are analytical in the way you do things and you know how it is that you currently work best. So we'll come to the new book in just a second, but if you can, just run us through like the process of getting there or finishing one book and then having an idea for the next book and mapping it out, and how long you'll give yourself to get the first draft and then the subsequent 19 drafts done.
So I once I have an idea, and I don't know how ideas happen, and I think if anyone did, they would be very rich. But once I have an idea for a book, then I will just start making a lot of notes. So I have like a Google Keep on my phone. I have a massive, notes document on my laptop, and all the time I'm like reading, doing other stuff. It doesn't matter. Kind of walking in the park, little thoughts will come to me about that. What if this character was doing that, and what if the story did this? And so all the time I'm just thinking about this story and these characters. And I just constantly make notes. And there's a point at which the notes document is getting unwieldy, and I know I have to kind of start wrestling it into some kind of proper shape, at which point I'll start usually thinking, just thinking more depth about the character, like who are they, what's their motivation, what are their kind of emotional and psychological hang-ups, because most of my characters have those. And then eventually I will start doing what I call my writing plan, which is a kind of chapter by chapter breakdown of what's going to happen in the whole book. And at some point in all of that, I will do my post-it note corkboard thing, just so it's so funny because I never look at it. I literally never look at it, but it's almost like I have to do it so that some other part of my brain has got it kind of the whole story mapped out visually on different coloured post-it notes, which I then never refer to again. And then it is just a case of I print off a page at a time of the writing plan, and I'm constant as I'm writing. I'm then constantly changing stuff that I want to write later, so I'm constantly adding to the notes, and I'm constantly shifting stuff around as to what I will write in a later chapter or a later section. So it's a constantly kind of evolving, changing process. But I kind of need that architecture to get me going.
And how long will you give yourself for the first draft, ideally?
Ideally, I still work in school terms because that's the way my life is structured. So ideally, I would get a first draft done in a term, which is about 12, 13 weeks. It's often 2 terms rather than a term, but that's my aim is always a term, but it's often 2.
And when it stretches out to a second term, how much grief does that give you?
None really, to be honest, because I think, if I know that I've been working and I've been trying to write that book and it's just taking a bit longer, I don't berate myself for it, because the book, I kind of trust that I'm pretty disciplined about working. And so I kind of trust that it'll get done when it gets done. And I don't think, for me, like putting loads of pressure on and saying, well, you have to have this done by December the 1st, otherwise, you're terrible, would be particularly helpful.
And those notes that you make, that you print out every day, and you're constantly giving yourself room to wiggle because you're moving stuff here and there. As you say, it's this evolving beast, but how thorough are they?
They're pretty thorough. So, I think the writing plan for 3 Mothers was about 18,000 words long. So if you think the book's about 95, I mean, it's pretty well plotted out, and when I say plotted out, I mean it's also what I want characters to be feeling and thinking, and it's not just, it's not just plot points. It's also, kind of emotional beats. It's what I want a chapter to reveal about a character. So it's pretty well rounded.
And before you started writing your debut, were you fully aware that that's how you work best, by getting down, I guess, a quarter of a novel before you even started writing the thing, just in plans?
Funnily enough, I did just naturally do that with that. I mean, in a way, that was a slightly easier book to structure because it was about someone who was going through grief, and I structured it around the 5 stages of grief. So it had a very natural structure anyway. So in a way, that that kind of happened organically, I think. And I'm all, as I say, like, I'm someone who has like lots of to-do lists. My Google Keep is just full of to-do lists. So yeah, I think I'm someone for whom that kind of methodical, it's sort of movable, methodical, but nonetheless quite organized approach is just probably part of my personality.
Well, the new one is Three Mothers. And you're right, no one knows where ideas come from, but where did this one come from? What can you tell us about the first moment, about the idea for this story? How did it pop into your head?
So I'm not going to say too much about that because I don't want to give away a spoiler, but I was watching a TV show as a drama, and there was a particular moment between a parent and a child that just emotionally destroyed me. It was just so poignant and so powerful. And it was probably no more than 5 or 6 seconds of screen time. And I just couldn't get it out of my head, like this one exchange between this parent and child. And I just kept on thinking about it and kept on thinking about it. And I started thinking about, I guess as writers do, what ifs, like what if that was a different situation? What if this had happened? What if that had happened? And it grew out then of an idea that I wanted, I think a lot of my books are about, obviously dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional families, but they're often also about parents and their kind of fierce love and protection for their children. And sometimes that love and protection makes them do things that aren't altogether sensible. Sometimes it's very protective, sometimes it's very necessary. But I think that is kind of one of the sort of core themes that I often explore, and there was a real sense of that with this book. And then there, it's a bit like, I think with writing, it's a bit like there are many kind of plates spinning in your head at any one time of kind of themes you're interested in or stuff that's going on in the world that's piqued your interest. And it's almost like at any point you might think, oh yeah, that one would really work here, and that's something I'm interested in, and it's something I want to explore, and actually it really works with these characters, and it really works with this story. So it's almost like you have this whole melting pot of things that you are just generally interested in the world, and at any given time a story will naturally lend itself to some of those themes or ideas.
When you're pre-planning to such a thorough extent, and knowing the beginning, the middle, and the end, how organic can those things be? Because you know the beats of the genre that you're working in, you know how long a novel needs to be, so you know when things need to happen. When you're thinking, oh, this is a good midpoint twist, or whatever it is, how do you allow those moments to kind of happen naturally with your thoughts, although these kind of things do need to happen to keep people reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, because what I'm really interested in is character, and I'm interested in how people have become the people they are in terms of their past, in terms of their childhood, in terms of their relationships and their experiences. So that for me is probably always at the forefront. And if anything, that's the thing I need to dial back on. I think, in my debut there was way too much of that, and I wish someone had said dial back that even more. And so in a way, I think the story beats in a way kind of anchor me in the plot, because what I'm really interested in is how the characters are reacting to the things that have happened around them. That's the writing that I'm, that I find myself kind of immersed in. So I think in a way the two things work quite well together, because I have, the plot that keeps me grounded and the story beats and the plan, and that almost frees me up then to just explore the characters and their feelings and as I say, sort of their motivations and their experience of what is happening to them within the plot.
And talking about character, in novels in domestic noir, like all genres, and I know that writers often really don't like being labelled in genre, but it's the way the publishing world works. Characters could kind of have such similar traits across novels that perhaps they start to blend into each other. At least that's the fear. What are you doing to really ground each different character across each different story in complete authenticity?
I mean, I think completely different probably for me is slightly extreme. The fact is, what I want my characters to feel are relatable and like people and people that you have around you, and families that you can identify with. But obviously, as I say, because I think the thing that interests me is how characters have got to where they are, or how they find themselves in those situations. Like no two characters are ever going to have the same backstory. No two characters are ever going to have the same type of relationship. So, and no two characters are ever going to have the same kind of experience, in the same way that, you can have two people who, grow up in the same household and to all intents and purposes have the same childhood, but actually their experiences and their memories of that childhood can be completely and utterly different and completely diverse. And they can, not agree on anything, that happened within their childhood. So I think, am I consciously thinking, Abby in Three Mothers needs to be different from, Livy in The Forgetting? I'm not constantly thinking that, but they're not, in the same way that, you and I are not the same people, because they're different people with different experiences and different situations that they're in.
So maybe what you might be thinking about is, we spoke before about the beats of a genre. So when someone reads a domestic noir or psych thriller, whatever it might be, they expect certain things. And we've mentioned that you are analytical. How did you learn, and how much are you thinking about what needs to be in these novels to get a reader to pick it up and stay with you?
I think where psychological thriller and domestic suspense really work is when they are character driven. And I think there is a lot. I think there's quite a lot in this genre that is very, very plot driven. And as I say, you may be wanting to race through just to find out, who did it, or what happened, or, what the twist or the secret is, but you're not necessarily emotionally engaged in the characters and their dilemmas. And I think the books that work best in these genres are those where you can relate to the characters, you care about the characters, you understand what the characters are going through, that empathy is there and it's ramped up. I think the kind of the best in these genres really focus on the characters, and they sort of force the reader to ask, what would I do in that situation and how would I feel? And you only get that through quite sort of emotive, sort of psychologically driven writing in terms of the characters, I think.
And that is it for this week's episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Hannah Beckerman for coming on the show. The new novel is Three Mothers, and you can get a copy right now. If you're doing that, by the way, have a think about doing it through our bookshop.org page, because that way it supports me, Hannah, and your local independent bookshop too. So it's a win-win-win. The link is wherever you're listening. Also, it's there for Patreon and Ko-Fi if you would like to support the show. And this week we are sponsored by Faber Academy, whose flagship writing a novel course is back, running from October in London, Newcastle and online. You can find out more about enrolling. We've got the link where you're listening. And the Faber Academy writing a novel course is a commitment to your craft. They're sponsoring the show this week, and I will be back with a brand new guest on the podcast next week. Until then, thank you for listening.